Great. Well, welcome to a episode two, actually, of our Solutionaries interview series here with the Earthstock Foundation. I'm your host, Michael DiMartino. It's a cold, dry evening here in Crestone, Colorado, in the Four Corners, but nonetheless, a beautiful full moon out. And I'm very honored to have this opportunity tonight to do a more official interview of someone I've gotten opportunity to get to know him and his work. Not only an amazing person, but a great teacher and connector. And I want to welcome to Solutionaries, Bruce L Erickson. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Michael.
So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about regeneration. I know it's a word that can be very loaded. More and more people seem to be using it, and it kind of midwifed out of the sustainability movement and resilience, and we'll talk some about that. But you are a professor and you teach, I believe, regenerative education at the university in Antioch, which I know a lot of the universities haven't been open, but you are a professor and teacher, and share a little bit about what you do and how you got involved in it, please.
Well, it was a long journey, but it was, I grew up in Minnesota, and just for the background, grew up in Minnesota by my family, all in Sweden. So it was a diversity of exposure, both culturally and this observation about how people function and work. And by chance, when I got married, I met a lovely French Canadian girl and got married and went to live in Montreal, which was, I would say Montreal at that time in the 1970s was an epicenter for dramatic change on so many fronts. Man in His World exhibit was there. It was the forefront of incredible innovative architecture. It was medicine. It was, you could hardly pick a subject of which the culture of Montreal, which is many different countries, was just blooming like a field of wildflowers all over the place. And coming from Minnesota, which was everything was conservative and canned peas and corn on the cob, I mean, it was a heady change. And so what happened is that, and also I helped draft an amazing book, which was Psi, the Other World Catalog, a psychic phenomenon at the time. And I was tapped to teach at John Abbott College on social trends. And I had a mixture of students from all over the world. And, you know, in that kind of environment, you could ask every question your imagination could conjure up. And I just became struck with the way that things were in many ways different. And in terms of regeneration, there was the way just French Canadians would decorate or do their homes. I mean, they didn't have the budgets that many Americans did, and they were tremendously innovative, and they were very creative, to the point that some of my French Canadian decoration magazines, when they ended up down in Minnesota, got taken away very fast by friends. and it was, and then Toronto, I was tied in with a consulting firm called Idetics, which was a firm that did the imaging and design creative that led to the beautification of downtown Toronto, which downtown Toronto is one of the most beautiful downtown areas of any North American city imaginable. Again, innovative architecture, innovative thinking, the medium of the message, a lot of stuff came out of there as well. So, you know, you couldn't help but be, if your mind was awake at all, is that you knew that a lot of change was coming. We haven't had a high-speed train, believe it or not, traveling from Montreal to Toronto, something we haven't even got yet in the United States. So, so anyway, it was a place of endless exposure to new ideas, new thoughts, and what have you. It was just amazing. By the way, Canada was way ahead of the United States in implementing the internet in their early days, by the way, that as well. So
fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you hit on a few key words. I know that we're going to talk a little more about the meaning of regeneration. And, I remember for decades, people have been talking about sustainability. And of course, out of that kind of came this concept of resilience because of so many things happening with natural disasters and climate change and
Mhm.
things happening to the power grid and those types of things. And now it's really spawned this whole idea of what I would call full spectrum regenerative culture, which is not just dealing with the environmental piece, but it's also dealing with the idea of social justice and health and economy and really many different spokes of this regenerative hub. But I love that you touched on words like, innovation, education. I know, part of that is also things like preservation. And for some people doing regenerative work, I spoke the other day with Frank L. Curry, who wrote a book about constitutional rights to a healthy environment, that some people through their regenerative work even deal with things like legislation and litigation. But could you talk a little bit about what you do with regenerative education and really what that means to you and how it potentially goes into other areas? And then I want to share a little bit about the Sustainable World Source book.
Well, what I do is, and I used to be tied to the World Future Society, and so what you might say, I do a lot of trend research, and some of it is current out. And for your listeners, I'll give you a real revelation that just occurred this last couple of weeks, and it's a very significant one. Is that we're tied to incredibly disruption in transportation issues, supply issues, shipping. I mean, it's the biggest bloody mess imaginable. And I was fortunate enough to read a report that was actually written by a truck driver who did a better job than McKinsey and Company and our government on the analysis of that. And suddenly a light bulb went off when a friend of mine said, "Oh, Bruce, did you ever bother to look at the website Etsy?" And I said, "Well, I've heard of it. I probably scanned it sometime or another." And it's all about people making things and selling direct. And then a lot of other research I did, I realized that we may be on the threshold of an amazing piece of creativity. And this is it. The situation is that in the United States, and I have to address our country first, is that we let go of so much of our manufacturing and fabrication expertise that has been shipped to other countries, China mainly, and other countries as well. And the thing about it is we forgot to how to make things. I mean, and what a friend of mine runs a very successful retail operation on the coast of California. And when I sat down with him the other day, he said, "Bruce, we had a container coming from the Far East, and we had to pay $19,000 for one container shipment to get to our store." I said, "What?" I mean, that was beyond my imagination. And then it even cemented it further. Maybe one of the biggest trends we will see is Americans, Canadians included, and what have you, is the fact is that we can make it ourselves. Look at the innovations that occurred just in publishing. Years ago, and I used to do a magazine, it was really a labor. It was a lot of work. Then the personal computer came in, printers and everything else. And today, Michael, in your little studio, you can do everything the New York Times can do. I mean, just with a very small area. But that's extended to everything. It's extended to woodworking, metal shop, everything, electronics. I mean, you name the subject. You can shop for tools and kits, and they're amazingly easy and the fabrication methods. I think we're on the threshold when people discover, damn it, I can do that myself. I know little groups of technical people are even building cars, for God's sake. There's plans on the internet to build your own tractor. You don't need to buy
one of the, I think one of the interesting things too is not just manufacture, but also fix and repair things, because we've
Right.
gotten accustomed to living in such a disposable culture where we just throw everything out. And I know there's this whole movement now to kind of upcycle things, whether it's through recycling or turning things, even plastics, into other types of building materials. So, even fixing and
Even Apple
transitioning.
has caught on to that. Even Apple announced they're going to finally sell you parts. Oh my God. Okay, the Vatican has become Episcopalian. Okay, yeah.
So typically, when someone comes into one of your, and I'm not sure what the official name of your class is, I would just say generally regenerative education. I know that this is one of the tools that
Yes.
you've used in your classes. What could people expect to learn in one of these classes, and what are some of the areas that you would be touching on?
Well, first of all, I have to correct one thing. The title for I'm designated to be the person that works to put together the 5th edition, which would be titled The Sustainable and Regenerative World Sourcebook. We have to change that title.
Bravo.
I got a lot of criticism about the word sustainability that says, well, that just means maintaining the things the way they are, and you don't want to do that.
Things are crumbling too fast to just
Yeah.
maintain anymore.
You ask a very good question, Michael, and I've been in my person that supervises me for the class. We have to think a little differently on this one, because the amount of change that we're faced with, there isn't hardly anything that touches our lives that isn't being changed. And when I look with my team and we look at the book as you just held it up, what will it look like in that 5th edition? It's a very worthy challenge, and one far larger than that edition that took to do that edition. And so there isn't anything that, it's medicine, it's how people are being educated. How do they train? The need for more vocational training, not just going to the university and get an art history degree. You can't name hardly an area that isn't due for some pretty ripe change. And so I would say that I'm right now in a quest of what we need, where we're going, and how to do it. And fortunately, and I want to honor a marvelous network of people that contribute to that. I was on the phone for an hour and a half with one from Prague, Czechoslovakia. You're asking a good question, but this would be a much longer interview if you really wanted to answer.
Well, we might have to do another one, because we also know we live in a culture of limited attention spans. So
yeah,
typically we can, maintain people's interest in, up to 20 or 30 minutes, especially since this is part of our Earthstock regenerative channel, and people come here to learn something. Hopefully we give them some practical tool they can take away. But I will say, it's interesting what you're saying. I call that full spectrum regeneration, because we can talk about the environment, we can talk about energy and technology, we can talk about social justice, economics, we can talk about, like you said, health. We can talk about so many aspects, like really everything right now, I think on some level needs to be regenerated. Even the way, let's say, that kind of religions approach the idea of a spiritually interconnected and interdependent human family. As great as some of these religious teachings are, they can also be platforms for division or separation. And we really need to get everyone to the round table here to implement solutions and become part of the solution to make the changes we need to not only, again, preserve what we have, but to innovate these new regenerative models. So it's really fascinating. And I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about our conversations in the book, because usually if I say regenerative, people immediately go to the environment. And there's so many areas that we need to regenerate. Again, our communities, it just, it goes on and on, the way arts and culture, economic development. So it's really a fascinating book. I'll hold it up again. And what do you think the difference between regeneration and sustainability is? If you could share a little insight on that.
I think sustainability is what I just said a brief moment ago. It's how you maintain things without a lot of degradation, okay? And you it's like agriculture. You plant your seeds in the spring, you harvest in the fall, you look at the cycles of the season, and you allow for that, and you take care of your soils, your water resources. In other words, you ensure for perpetuity, what you're taking care of. A good example of sustainability, if I were to take it, is the old estates in England. They've maintained for hundreds of years. They had to. The people that depended on them for their livelihood and their homes and everything else counted on that. And there was a high degree of consciousness for that preservation. That's been true for Europe for a long, long, long time. US, a little bit, later on. And so I would say that that's a good example of sustainability. Regeneration is when you're faced with all the changes, climate and otherwise, and how do you restore, you grow back. There's a wonderful series done by a Chinese videographer, Michael, that I think you know who I'm talking about. Can't think of his name right up, who goes around the world and shows where, deserts and places that were destroyed get totally, degraded, and they're restored. The movie, The Biggest Little Farm, that was done, about a year ago, is a classic example of that done in the United States, and a brilliant job. I recommend that to everybody, your listeners. That's a real eye opener of what's possible. And that I would say define as regenerative. And they took a desolate place and turned it into a Garden of Eden.
Well, it's amazing because more and more people are getting away from the old model of industrial and petroleum-based agriculture and getting more into what we call regenerative agriculture, which is all about the soil food web and working with ideas of permaculture design and what supports each other, but also that soil is alive and we have to feed the soil, which feeds the plant, not just, throw on pesticides and insecticides and, various plant foods that a lot of them are toxic and petroleum based, which of course ends up in our watershed anyways. So a lot of fascinating innovations happening. I actually had a conversation the other day with a gentleman, Michael, from Sacramento area with Agrisonics, and they're doing a lot of stuff with using sound technology to encourage plant growth, which also helps in the area of different types of funguses and insects and stuff. So it's really fascinating. We live at such a incredibly innovative time with all these technologies. And I just want to include in this conversation, when I work with a lot of indigenous communities, the idea also that this isn't a new idea, that traditional ecological knowledge goes back thousands of years to indigenous people and the way they managed forests and grew food and even, killed animals and used every part of an animal. That everything to them was maintaining a balance between these various ecosystems.
Well, I work also in the health field and alternative medicine extensively, in frequency medicine. We look at a lot of different things, but one of the most amusing things that cornered my thing was the fact, if you compare agriculture in the 1800s and early 1900s compared to now, and there was a video that actually came from Colorado about a distillery where they found that the grains that were used in the 1800s were far superior to what was being done today because of all of the mutation of the seeds and everything, all the junk that they've done with agriculture. And they said even the tools for distilling their beverages were far superior if you bought something in 1900. In fact, you couldn't even buy that technology today, and they had to replicate the whole thing. I was fortunate, by the way, to go to one of the distilleries and buy a bit of their product, I might add. Okay.
Wow.
And how should I say? The imbibation was most pleasant.
Innovation and celebration.
Yeah. I mean, we were finding out crazy things in health, like some of those old monks, okay, who focused on the health of their people, and that's their only concern. And they put 140 herbs in a beverage and everything else. We actually found in our test now, I caution your listeners about this because we will never publish an official paper on this. I mean, it'll bring back burning at the stake if we do.
Right.
But we found that some of the old German bitters and some of the old cordials in that time will actually reduce the protein spiking for those who've had the vaccine.
Well, it's interesting. Someone I know is a permaculture teacher, and they work with the Weston Price Society, and they're very much about unpasteurized milk, permaculture, also doing stuff with fermentation, and a lot of these skills that, at least here in North America, that we've seemed to forgotten because we're such a culture now of convenience and cheap, and we want it quick and we want it fast, and we have to run here and run there, and somehow again we have to regenerate society, because I mean, we can see the amount of alcoholism, drug abuse, the prevalence of the pharmaceutical industry who want to throw, medications as symptoms of deeper issues, and anyone who's studying any sort of homeopathic or naturopathic Ayurvedic medicine knows that a lot of it is our state of mind, our sense of spiritual awareness, our environment, but also, we are what we eat, and also we are what we digest. And we live in a very broken society, and I mean the levels of depression and all these things. So I don't want to seem a bummer right now, but we can see that things really do have to change, and this is where we start talking about social regeneration.
And it's interesting when people start to wake, there's a beauty in it. And the beauty is when you go in a home and they've got one of those IKEA grow balls or whatever you want to talk about it, and the chives are being grown there. The basil, my test for everybody is the fact is when you taste basil grown biodynamically versus what you find in the grocery store, boy, you talk about a different level of taste entirely. And it's self-evident. And there's a when presented right, there's a certain charm that invites your creativity. I've got a young nephew in Sweden. For instance, he puts greenhouses attached to kitchens. Now he builds out a little greenhouse, to attach a kitchen. He had so much business in his construction thing. At the age of 17, he didn't even need to go on to university. He was already buying a new Volvo. He didn't have to worry about that. But
Right.
I think if one looks at it, really, a lot of that can be a lot of fun, a lot of entertaining. And if any teacher that has worked in those fields, I'm talking about like grade school level and stuff, the kids are, when they plant a flower, like in Santa Cruz was one of the first schools that, taught really growing methods, and they would grow their food for lunch, is that the kids were like, wow, I grew that and that's an edible flower? Oh my God, it's like a revelation. And these kids get very excited. We have to tap into that creativity, their love for nature. And I think when that, as you described so aptly, Michael, is the fact that when that awakening occurs and the beauty of it occurs, people will go like, why in the hell did I do that old technique anyway? I mean, this is much more fun, much more engaging. The flavor is better, on and on and on.
Or why did I spend 12 hours a day on the computer and social media, disconnected from the natural world, which has again, that's a whole other conversation. I'm hoping we'll have more conversations.
I'm guilty too, Michael. I'm guilty too. Yeah.
But it's amazing. Even when I grew up, when I was a baby, my mom would put me out in the yard, and I'd have sticks in my mouth and dirt. And they actually find that a lot of these natural bacteria that occur in nature are a big part as far as developing our digestive biome, our immune system. Mm-hmm. And now there's a whole generation of they call them generation glowers, where they call them glowers because they spend the majority of their waking time in front of a screen. And I'm certainly not anti-technology and computers. I'm not saying that, but we have to balance this digital world along with the natural world. And it's imperative to our state of mind, our spiritual awareness, and our physical and emotional and mental health.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm because I have a thirst for information, innovation, and change and everything else, I'm guilty of it as well. And I do a lot of it. But another thing is that is in attracting friends and colleagues and associates who also have the insight to grow. I'm going to have to play uncle to a 14-year-old boy soon when I move to my new place. His mother's raised him on his own for the years, and Marshall goes, Bruce, I'm adopting you as my uncle, and we're going to do a lot of fun, and we're going to go down and out in nature. And I just said to my friends, I said, God, it's taking a 14-year-old boy to yank my chain. Okay. and he's charming as the Dickens and really intelligent and he's eager to do this and eager to do that. And we got to go down to Anacorta Island, that nature thing and all those marine animals and stuff. And I'm going, dude, what did I step into? I think I never thought that my biggest change agent was going to be a 14-year-old boy.
Incredible, because as you know, they're going to inherit, and they are inheriting the world that many of us have created, some ways positively and some not so positive way, you know, going all the way back to baby boomers and the Woodstock generation and the idea of peace and love and the back to the land movement, civil rights, human rights, women's rights, the health food movement, the important role of music in culture, the anti-war movement. And, you know, here we are 52 years later. And part of me, even though I was only a baby then, I'm kind of scratching my head saying, you know, what happened? How far have we really come? But then we start to see the young kids, the Greta Thunbergs of the world, who are inheriting things and saying, they're kind of calling people out and saying, we don't want to inherit your mess. We got to get this together and get things cleaned up. So it's a really such a transitional time on the planet. And yeah, I just have to say, we have a couple minutes left. I really appreciate all of our discourse that we've been able to share.
Yeah,
And
I
our
want
time.
to share. Yeah, I want to share one final thought with your readers. Several years ago, I was fortunate enough to be in New York to do some lectures, and I met two women who were consultants in the cottage food and cottage beverage industry. That's where people, you know, could be a housewife or a family or what have you, would be making cheese or breads or, you know, anything you could come across. And they would travel through the state of New York and New England, assisting these people in various industries. And they took me around and they learned a lot of their tactics, and a lot of their learning was actually coming from the Amish communities who live rather, you know, basically. And what they told me economically was really interesting. They said, people who are doing this are doing and making very good livelihoods for themselves. You know, if they could be making empanadas or what have you. She said, by and large, most of those people are doing good quality, you know, basic, you know, foods like that. She says they're sold out by the end of the week. And she says they're not suffering for customers whatsoever. And the cheese makers, there's a book in the slow food movement about cottage cheese makers. And those people have done extremely well in the economy because people are getting back to flavors, quality of food, and everything else. And in turn, they're learning in the process. So that's another area that I want to emphasize. You can spread yourself a long ways. And Michael, anything I've said here, I'm glad to give you the links to eventually. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I just want to let our viewers know that I've had the honor tonight on our Solutionaries little mini interview series here for the Earthstock Foundation to talk with Professor Bruce L Erickson, who teaches regenerative education. He's also currently working on the Sustainable and Regenerative Next Edition World Source
Yes,
Book.
and I'm also got Heartwork Center, where I looked and designed the future of medical clinics and medicine. And
Wow.
very much, yeah. And that if they go to heartworkcenter.org, they'll see the whole layout on that one.
Yeah, it's fascinating, all this whole thing with you know, scale of technologies and using sound frequencies and the relationship to health. And it's interesting because, you know, sometimes people can, if I talk to people about this stuff, they're like, oh, that's very countercultural. And I think, well, I mean, maybe 50 years ago could be seen as countercultural or, you know, bohemian, new age, whatever. But more and more, we're starting to see that, no, this is actually a practical pathway for humanity's self-preservation.
Mhm.
And it's interesting. I just got a copy of this book. I'm not sure if you've seen it, from Paul Hawkins.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and it's all about ending the climate crisis in one generation. So I think it's really interesting that now this whole concept of full spectrum regeneration is becoming very mainstream. And I know this book is skyrocketing and even being read by a lot of people and even getting awards. So it's an idea whose time has come, because I think that scientists are showing us that we got to kind of make a U-turn and change a lot of things pretty quickly here. So
Well, my friends who were at Glasgow in Scotland came back with the message that a lot of the young people that were attended and peripheral to that, not all of them got into the meetings and everything else, but it was a tremendous dissatisfaction with the leadership of the world. And from the head of the Chinese government to US and everything else, they said we're governed by idiots who don't know what the heck to do. And they're all on the take with the petroleum and the fossil fuel industry. There was 500 delegates that went to that, all from the fossil fuel industry, that went to Glasgow, more than any other industrial segment. That's a disgrace, actually.
yeah, and it was interesting. I saw a special last night on one of the world's foremost um, biological oceanographers. I don't remember her name, something Bailey, and she was also in Glasgow, but she's been talking about her 50 years of work and research on oceans. And we're really at the point that the oceans, which can help not only with the planetary waters that connect everything, but the atmospheric conditions and how it affects land and rainfall and acidity and all the microplastics in the ocean, the wildlife, that really the oceans are on the verge of dying. 60% of reef die off, 90% of sharks and a lot of aquatic life dying off. And she said, just look towards the intelligence of the ocean and you can really see what time it is on the planet. It's time for immediate and drastic change. And we can't count on broken leadership. We have to take it into our own hands, and really people have to become sovereign in their own leadership to do the right thing, because there's way too much multi-billions and trillions of dollars of corporations and personal interests and people or profit over people mentality to get the changes we need to initiate as fast as we need to initiate them. So hopefully I do these Solutionaries interviews to help inspire people to do something, whether it's cleaning up, using toxic cosmetics and body products that harm us, our health, cleaning up your home from toxic cleaning products or landscaping products and toxic gardening, to doing what you can. Maybe you can just be an advocate and make some small changes, or you become an activist and do more in your community. But everybody's got to pitch in and do something.
Yeah, it is. And if you look at a lot of things in Europe, even after World War II, like in Sweden, when the rivers were polluted and everything, is they made environmental changes right back then. And there's been a consciousness in many parts of Europe, and sustainability was natural in Sweden, and I mean in Switzerland, and the farms and everything else. So, it isn't something new. It's been practiced for a long, long time. Go to Japan and see what they've done. I've done a lot of work with the Japanese, and some of it's just beautiful. Of course, and it's just that consciousness that's inherently there. But I mean, unfortunately, the United States has been unconscious for a very long time, and it still subscribes to the thing that I'll do it my way, and not necessarily take into consideration how it affects others.
Well, hopefully things are changing, and I'm not necessarily an advocate of a certain political party, but I think it's interesting to see some of the things that the Biden administration is pushing for, and going back to previous administrations gutting the Environmental Protection Agency and opening up wild frontiers and federal lands to fracking and resource exploitation. So hopefully we're starting to go in the right direction. So
I like the best political statement that was ever uttered in the last 6 years, and it actually came from the former president of Mexico. He says, we ought to help those Americans build a wall around Washington, D.C., and to protect the rest of the country. And I thought, that guy's got the most accurate statement of anybody, okay? I lived in Washington, D.C., and if you're expecting that innovation and positive change come out of there, you're really subscribing to wishful thinking.
All right. So as we wrap up, how can people find out more about you? You have a website or a way people can contact you?
I got a website. It's brucelerickson.com. And on my medical work, it's heartworkcenter.org. But I operate with a group. We'll be doing a lot more, and there'll be a lot more news about what we're doing, both not only it'll be on the sustainability regeneration side, and plus the health side, which are really interrelated. If you want to be healthy, you better have a healthy environment. The two are they're not separate issues. They're related issues. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting because, I do follow astrology a little bit. And right now with the full moon and this whole eclipse, and it's the longest eclipse in almost 600 years, and it won't occur for another 600 years. And, there's all these things happening. But they were talking about that the kind of the planetary alignment right now is the same as when they created the Declaration of Independence. I thought that was kind of fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, that's
So
interesting.
I was thinking, well, why don't we do this? Over 200 years later, let's create a declaration of interdependence about how human beings and cooperation with each other and nature is really the key to our survival in the future. So we're going to start drafting that up in our spare time.
Good call, Michael. I totally endorse that. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Okay, are we wrapping it up?
Yes, sir. If you have any last words of wisdom, and I just want to remind people that this is Solutionaries, a media project of the Earthstock Foundation. We're talking with Professor Bruce L Erickson, teacher of regenerative education, sustainability, and also working a lot with health and health technologies. And any last words of wisdom you would like to leave us with, or any thoughts?
Well, my only thought is for people to try to maintain a positive attitude, invoke your curiosity. Know that every one of you listening to this recording is in some way divinely guided. Listen to your heart. Listen carefully, and ask, from your divine guidance, whatever form you fit that it be, to be led in the direction and with people, that know and respect this earth and want the best for all of humanity.
Well, thank you. You're preaching the gospel, sir, and we greatly respect you and appreciate your time this evening.
All right. Thank you, Michael. We're glad to do it. Okay.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Bye.